The first thing I need to admit is that none of this was supposed to happen. If you asked me a year ago whether I would ever step into someone else's clothes and find myself swallowed by a new identity, I would have laughed it off, maybe even gotten angry at the suggestion. But here I am, telling you about the day I wore her dress, and somehow, in a way I still struggle to fully understand, I became their real child. It started with something so simple, so small, that I almost brushed it away as meaningless. My mother had passed away years before, and the silence left behind in the house was deafening. My father remarried, and though my stepmother was kind in her way, I always felt like an outsider. She had a daughter from her first marriage, bright, confident, and everything I thought I wasn't. She walked into every room as if it was built for her, while I always felt like I was sneaking through the back door of life. My stepmother treated me politely, even warmly sometimes, but never like I truly belonged. And maybe it was just my paranoia, but there were days when I swore I could see it in her eyes. I wasn't really hers. I wasn't the child she imagined raising. The dress itself had been sitting in the wardrobe for months. I saw it whenever the door was open, pale lavender fabric, delicate, flowing, with tiny stitched patterns like petals drifting across water. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't expensive, but it seemed to glow with a strange quiet beauty. It was my stepsister's dress, one she had worn to some school event and then abandoned. I told myself it was nothing, just fabric. Yet every time I walked by, it called to me in a way I didn't understand. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was longing. Or maybe it was the desperate need to feel, even for a moment, like I wasn't invisible. The night it happened, the house was heavy with tension. My father had been away for weeks on business, and my stepmother had been quieter than usual. At dinner, she asked me a question, simple, almost harmless, about what I wanted to do with my future. I stumbled through an answer, something vague about computers, and I saw her sigh. It wasn't cruel, but it stung, that quiet exhale of disappointment. My stepsister laughed softly under her breath, not mocking me directly but making me feel small, smaller than I had ever felt before. After dinner, I went upstairs, shut my door, and sat on the bed shaking. It was irrational, I know, but I felt like I could vanish and no one in that house would notice. I don't know what pushed me over the edge that night. Maybe it was anger, maybe grief, maybe the ghost of my mother whispering in my ear. But I stood up, walked into my stepsister's room while she was out with friends, and opened the wardrobe. The dress was there, waiting. My hands shook as I touched it. The fabric was softer than I expected, almost impossibly smooth. I told myself it was just a joke, a private rebellion. Just slip it on for a second, laugh at how ridiculous it looked, then take it off and never speak of it again. But the moment I pulled it over my body and saw myself in the mirror, I couldn't breathe. I didn't see a joke. I didn't see something ugly or wrong. I saw me. Not the awkward, half-forgotten child who never knew where he belonged. I saw someone who looked whole, someone who looked like they finally matched the pieces that had always been scattered inside. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and I wanted to rip the dress off because it terrified me. But I couldn't. I just stood there, staring, while my heart raced faster than it ever had before. And then came the sound I feared most, the creak of the door. My stepmother's voice, low but sharp, cut through the silence. "What are you doing?" I froze. The mirror showed me caught in lavender light, caught in something I couldn't explain. My stepmother's eyes were wide, not with anger, but with something I couldn't place. Fear. Shock. Recognition. For a second, I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. I opened my mouth to explain, to beg, to scream, but no words came out. Then something happened I never could have predicted. She stepped closer, her hand trembling, and whispered, "You look just like her." I didn't know who she meant. My mind spun. Her. Did she mean her daughter? Did she mean my mother? But the way her voice cracked, I realized she was seeing something more than fabric on skin. She was seeing a memory. She was seeing someone she had lost, or maybe someone she had wished for. I wanted her to shout. I wanted her to tell me I was wrong, that I had betrayed something sacred. Instead, she walked to the bed, sat down, and covered her face with her hands. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought you didn't belong. But maybe I was the one who couldn't see. My stepsister arrived home minutes later, and the scene should have been a disaster. I braced myself for the laughter, for the cruel mocking I'd never recover from. But when she walked in and saw me standing there, her jaw dropped. For a long, unbearable silence, she just stared. Then she said something that nearly knocked me to the floor. You look like the sibling I always wished I had." She didn't laugh. She didn't mock. She just said it, like she had been holding it in for years. The night stretched on, and the three of us sat together in a strange, fragile quiet. My stepmother asked questions I never thought I would answer out loud. Did I feel different when I looked at myself this way? Did I want this, truly want it, beyond the shock of the moment? Every answer trembled out of me like glass shattering, but once it began, I couldn't stop. I told her about how I felt invisible, how I lived in constant fear of being unwanted, how the dress wasn't just fabric but a mirror that finally reflected something real. She listened, her eyes wet but unwavering. My stepsister leaned against me, silent, but not pulling away. For the first time since I'd entered that house, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own skin. But the story didn't end with quiet acceptance. The next morning, my father returned. And if you think the hardest part was wearing the dress, you're wrong. The hardest part was standing in front of him, trembling, while my stepmother said, "We need to talk about your child." His face hardened. His voice was colder than I had ever heard. He thought it was a phase, a humiliation, a betrayal of everything he wanted me to be. I thought he would throw me out then and there. But my stepmother stood between us, her shoulders squared. "You don't see it yet," she said, "but this is who your child really is. And if you can't accept that, then you're the one who doesn't belong here." The room spun. My father's silence stretched on for what felt like a lifetime. And then, for the first time in my life, I saw him break. His anger cracked into something rawer, uglier, fear. He didn't know how to face the truth staring back at him, but he didn't walk away either. What followed was not easy. There were days of screaming, days of silence, days when I thought I had ruined everything. But through it all, the dress remained folded neatly in my room, not as a costume, not as a secret shame, but as a promise. A reminder of the night when I stopped being invisible and became real. My stepmother began to call me her child, not stepchild, not stranger, but child. My stepsister stopped treating me like an intruder and started treating me like the sibling she had always wanted. And slowly, painfully, my father began to see me too. Not as the son he had imagined, but as the child he truly had. So when I tell you that the day I wore her dress changed everything, I don't mean it lightly. That was the day I crossed a line I never knew existed, the day I stepped into something terrifying and beautiful, the day I stopped being a shadow. I thought I was just slipping into fabric. But I slipped into myself. And when they looked at me, really looked at me, I became their real child. And I don't think I can ever go back. I thought the hardest part had passed after that night, after standing in front of my father and watching his silence nearly crush me, but the truth is, what came after was even harder. Wearing the dress once had opened something in me that I could never close again. I would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, my chest pounding, my thoughts racing in circles I couldn't escape. Who was I now? What did this mean? Was I still the same person, or had I crossed into someone entirely different? Every morning I woke up expecting everything to go back to normal, and every morning I felt a little more certain that normal was gone forever. The next morning after the confrontation with my father, I went downstairs expecting him to avoid me. Instead, he was at the table, sitting stiffly, his coffee untouched, his eyes fixed on the steam as though it could distract him from reality. I froze in the doorway, unsure if I should sit down. My stepmother gave me the smallest nod, urging me to be brave. I sat, my hands trembling against my knees. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Then my father finally lifted his head and said, almost in a whisper, "I don't understand this." His voice cracked, and I saw something that scared me more than his anger, his vulnerability. I had always seen him as unshakable, stern, immovable. Now he looked like a man who had lost his map and didn't know how to find his way back. I swallowed hard. Neither do I admitted. But I know how I feel. And I can't keep pretending I'm someone I'm not. My words hung in the air like smoke. He pressed his lips together, staring at me as though I had shattered some unspoken agreement between us. Then, without another word, he stood and left the table. My chest collapsed. I thought that was it, that he would never look at me the same way again. But my stepmother reached across the table, touched my hand gently, and said, "Give him time. You've been carrying this for years without even knowing it. Let him carry it for a while too." Days turned into weeks, and every day felt like a test. My stepsister surprised me the most. Instead of mocking or resenting me, she leaned in closer than ever before. She would knock on my door at night, arms full of her old clothes, whispering, "Try this one, it'll look amazing on you." At first, I resisted. I didn't want to depend on the thrill of slipping into those clothes just to feel alive. But her smile, her easy acceptance, melted my resistance. Piece by piece, I built a version of myself I had never allowed to exist before. Sometimes, staring in the mirror with her beside me, I felt like we weren't two separate people anymore. We were siblings, yes, but also allies, mirrors to each other's hidden truths. But not everything was acceptance. School was still brutal. I didn't show up wearing dresses or skirts, but something about me shifted. I carried myself differently, softer, maybe braver. And people noticed. Whispers trailed me in hallways. Laughter echoed behind my back. Some teachers eyed me with suspicion, others with pity. I told myself it didn't matter, but every cruel word dug into my skin like glass. I started spending more time at home, hiding in the strange sanctuary that my stepmother and stepsister had created for me. The real breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. My father walked into my room unexpectedly while I was trying on a sweater my stepsister had given me. My heart leapt into my throat. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared, his face unreadable. Then he stepped inside, closed the door, and said something that caught me completely off guard. "When your mother was pregnant, she wanted a daughter. She told me over and over, 'I can feel it. It's a girl.' And when you were born," she smiled, but there was something in her eyes, something unspoken. His voice trembled, and he sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at his hands. I've been carrying that memory for years, convincing myself it meant nothing. But seeing you now, I don't know. Maybe she saw something I didn't. Tears stung my eyes. I wanted to speak, but no words came out. My father's shoulders shook. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be the father you need. But I don't want to lose you." The words I had been aching to hear all my life finally spilled out of him, raw and fragile. Without thinking, I leaned against him, and for the first time since I could remember, he didn't pull away. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just my secret, my identity, my transformation. It was theirs too. My stepmother, my stepsister, my father, they were all being pulled into this journey with me. And the question wasn't whether I could survive it. The question was whether we all could. I didn't become their real child in one night. It wasn't the dress alone that transformed me. It was the courage to stand there in lavender fabric and let myself be seen, fully seen, without excuses or masks. It was my stepmother's quiet defense, my stepsister's unwavering acceptance, my father's eventual breaking point. It was every tear, every silence, every whispered confession in the dark. And yet, as I sit here telling you this, I know the story isn't over. Because every day, I still wake up with the same choice, to hide or to live as who I am. And every day, I remember the dress, the mirror, and the night I stopped being invisible. That was the day I became their real child. And every day since has been about learning how to stay that way. I used to think that once a secret was spoken out loud, once the mask slipped and the truth was revealed, life would settle into some kind of peace. But I was wrong. The night I wore her dress was only the beginning, not the end. Living as their real child wasn't a single moment, it was a series of moments, each one terrifying, each one asking me to prove myself again. Some days I felt strong enough to face it. Other days I wanted nothing more than to crawl back into silence and pretend none of it had ever happened. The weeks after my father finally opened up were full of contradictions. He would sit with me at dinner, asking small questions about school or what I wanted to eat, like everything was normal. But sometimes I would catch him staring at me, his jaw tight, his eyes searching for the child he thought he had lost. And then there were nights when I would hear him pacing the hallway outside my room, stopping at my door, then moving away again without knocking. It was as though he wanted to come inside but couldn't bring himself to. I pretended not to notice, but deep down I carried that sound with me, the footsteps of a man torn between love and fear. My stepmother, on the other hand, began to take on a role I never imagined. She became my anchor. One evening, she came into my room holding an old photo album. I braced myself, expecting some lecture about family or tradition, but instead she opened it to a picture of my mother, my real mother, wearing a soft summer dress in a faded photograph. The resemblance was undeniable, not just in features but in presence. "She would be proud of you," my stepmother whispered, her hand brushing the photo. "She would see you for who you are. Maybe I can't replace her, but I can stand with you." The words broke something open inside me. I cried so hard that night that my chest ached, but for the first time, I didn't cry alone. My stepsister kept surprising me too. One day she dragged me to the mall, insisting we look at clothes together. I resisted, panicked at the idea of being seen in public like that, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. "If you're going to be my sibling," she said, "then you're going to let me spoil you." Her energy was impossible to fight. We spent hours wandering aisles, her holding up skirts, blouses, shoes, asking me to imagine what it would feel like to wear them. I didn't buy anything, not that first time, but the experience left me trembling. For once, I wasn't sneaking or stealing moments alone in the mirror. For once, someone was inviting me into that world openly. But with visibility came risk. Rumors started to spread. I don't know who began whispering first, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone from school who saw me out with my stepsister, but soon people were talking. I could feel it in the way their eyes lingered on me, the smirks, the questions disguised as jokes. "Your sister's rubbing off on you, her," one classmate said with a sneer. I laughed it off, but inside, I wanted to disappear. The hardest part wasn't the cruelty, it was the fear that they would strip away what little courage I had left. Then came the night that changed everything again. My father called me into the living room after dinner, his voice steady but strange. On the coffee table lay a box I didn't recognize. He gestured for me to sit. "This belonged to your mother," he said quietly. My breath caught. My stepmother sat nearby, her hand resting on his arm, as though she had given him strength to do this. Slowly, he opened the box. Inside were folded clothes, pieces of jewelry, and at the very bottom, another dress. This one wasn't lavender like my stepsister's. It was soft blue, simple, but beautiful in its own way. He lifted it out carefully, his hands trembling, and held it out to me. "She never got to give this to you," he said. His voice broke on the last word. I stared at the dress, my heart pounding, unable to believe what I was hearing. "I don't know how to do this," he continued, tears gathering in his eyes. "But maybe this is where I start. I don't even remember standing up. I only remember the fabric against my skin, the way it seemed to hum with memory and love, as though it had been waiting all these years." My stepmother gasped softly, my stepsister's eyes filled with tears, and my father looked at me as if for the first time he truly saw me. Not the son he thought he had, not the stranger he feared, but the child who had always been his. That was the night the whispers and the rumors stopped mattering. That was the night I realized I didn't need to fight for permission to exist. I had already been given a place, not because I wore a dress, not because I fit someone else's vision, but because I was finally brave enough to stand in the open and say, "This is me." And for the first time, the people who mattered most believed me. But even then, I knew the journey wasn't over. The dress was not an ending. It was a beginning. And beginnings are always the hardest part. After that night with the blue dress, something inside me shifted, but it didn't mean the world suddenly became soft or kind. If anything, the challenges grew sharper, because now there was no way to hide from myself anymore. Once you've seen your reflection clearly, you can't unsee it. Every morning I woke up knowing I had to decide whether to shrink back into silence or step forward into a life I barely understood. School became the battlefield I dreaded most. At home, my stepmother and stepsister defended me like a shield, and my father, though still hesitant, was trying in his own clumsy way to show me that he cared. But outside those walls, I was exposed. I remember one day walking through the hallway, wearing nothing but jeans and a sweater, but there was a softness in the way I carried myself now, a light in my face I couldn't disguise. A group of boys snickered as I passed. One of them muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Nice look, princess." Laughter erupted. My chest tightened, but instead of running, I forced myself to keep walking. My hands shook, but I didn't let them see me break. That night I came home and locked myself in my room. I stared at the blue dress folded neatly on the chair and whispered to myself, "Am I strong enough for this?" It was my stepsister who answered without even knowing the question. She slipped into the room, sat beside me, and said, "You don't have to be strong all the time. You just have to be real. People are cruel because they're scared of real." Her words stuck in my chest like a flame that wouldn't go out. Weeks later, my father surprised me again. He came into my room holding an envelope. "This came in the mail today," he said. I opened it and froze. It was an invitation to a family reunion on his side. My heart dropped. Those gatherings were full of relatives who barely knew me but never missed a chance to judge. "We don't have to go," he said quickly, almost nervously. "But if we do, I want you to come as yourself." My throat closed. Was he really saying that? Was he ready to let the whole family see? The day of the reunion, I stood in front of the mirror in that blue dress, my hands trembling so badly I could barely fasten the clasp. My stepmother brushed my hair, my stepsister adjusted the hem, and my father waited at the door, silent but steady. Walking into that hall with them at my side felt like stepping into fire. Eyes turned. Conversations stopped. Whispers spread like smoke. My father's brothers and cousins exchanged glances that cut sharper than knives. My knees nearly buckled, but then I felt my father's hand rest firmly on my shoulder. His voice, louder than I'd ever heard it, echoed through the room, "This is my child." Just 4 words. But they hit like thunder. The whispers stopped. Some faces softened, others hardened, but it didn't matter, because he had said it. He had claimed me. That moment didn't erase the years of silence or the scars of being invisible. But it gave me something I had never had before: a foundation. For the first time, I wasn't standing alone. And with every step I took after that, I carried those words with me. "This is my child." But the journey was far from over. Acceptance isn't a single event, it's a battle that repeats every day. And I began to realize that my story wasn't just about finding courage in my home or even in my father's voice. It was about whether I could carry that courage into the world, into every place where eyes lingered too long and whispers burned too sharp. And I promised myself I would. Because I had already worn the dress, already become real in their eyes. Now it was time to become real in mine. The reunion felt like a turning point, but in truth it was only the first storm. After that day, the whispers followed us home in new ways. Some relatives stopped calling. Others sent letters, carefully worded but sharp, asking if my father had lost control of his household. I thought he might bend under the pressure, that he would ask me to hide again, but he surprised me. One evening, as he held one of those letters in his hand, I heard him rip it in half and toss it into the fire. "If they can't see you for who you are, they don't deserve to see you at all," he muttered. His voice shook, but the conviction in his words made me want to cry. At school, though, the pressure kept building. Teachers noticed my shrinking grades. Friends I thought I had quietly drifted away, unsure of what to say to me. And the bullying grew sharper. One afternoon, someone scrawled a word across my locker: ugly, cruel, meant to cut me down. For a moment I wanted to run. But something inside me snapped instead. I wiped the letters away with my sleeve, turned, and walked straight to class. My hands shook, my throat burned, but I refused to let them see me collapse. That night, my stepsister sat with me on the bed, her arm hooked through mine, and whispered, "You're stronger than you think. They only write things on walls because they can't say them to your face." The real test came months later, when graduation was approaching. Everyone was buzzing about gowns, about final ceremonies, about pictures that would last a lifetime. I dreaded it. What would I wear? How would I walk across that stage? My father asked the same question one evening, but not with fear. How do you want to walk across that stage? He asked, looking me in the eye. As someone pretending, or as yourself? The question terrified me. But deep down, I knew the answer. On the morning of graduation, I stood in my room staring at two options laid out before me, the traditional cap and gown, or the blue dress beneath it. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I might faint. My stepmother stood in the doorway, her eyes soft but steady. Whatever you choose, we will be with you, she said. My stepsister added, but if you walk across that stage as yourself, I promise you, you'll never forget how powerful it feels. So I did. I slipped the dress beneath the gown, hiding it at first, trembling all the way to the ceremony. My father sat in the audience, his face pale but determined. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, every step shaking, until I reached the center. And then I don't know what possessed me, I opened the gown just enough for the blue fabric to show. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could feel every eye on me, some filled with shock, others with something like awe. The principal hesitated, unsure, but finally handed me the diploma. I took it with shaking hands, the fabric glowing beneath the lights, my heart pounding like a drum. For the first time, I wasn't hiding in the shadows. For the first time, I wasn't just wearing a dress. I was wearing my truth. And as I stepped down from that stage, I caught my father's eyes in the crowd. He was standing, not just clapping, but standing, as if to tell the whole room that this was his child, his real child. That night, after the ceremony, I sat alone in my room with the diploma on my lap. I thought about everything it had taken to get here, the whispers, the fear, the dress that had started it all. And I realized this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of one. The world was still waiting, and it would not be gentle. But I had walked across that stage as myself. And that meant I could walk anywhere. After graduation, I thought the hardest battles were behind me. I told myself that if I could walk across that stage wearing the blue dress, if I could face an entire crowd of people and not collapse under their judgment, then I could face anything. But life has a way of humbling you the moment you think you've won. The world beyond school was different, bigger, harsher. Strangers didn't care about my history, didn't know the years of silence and struggle I carried. They only saw what was in front of them, and sometimes that meant curiosity, sometimes suspicion, and far too often, quiet rejection. College was my next step, and stepping onto that campus felt like walking into a foreign country where no one knew my name. On one hand, it was freeing. I could start fresh, no locker graffiti, no old classmates whispering. On the other hand, it was terrifying, because I had to decide again, who was I going to be here? Would I fold myself small and pass through unnoticed, or would I live openly, no matter the cost? At first, I chose caution. I kept to myself, wore neutral clothes, tried to blend. But blending only made me feel hollow, like I was shrinking into a shadow again. Then one evening, as I sat in my dorm room staring at the blue dress folded in my suitcase, I thought about my father standing at graduation, his voice clear as he claimed me in front of everyone. If he could find the courage after years of silence, what excuse did I have? So the next day, I walked across campus wearing a soft cardigan my stepsister had given me and a confidence that was half real, half borrowed from memory. People stared, but not everyone stared with cruelty. Some smiled, some nodded, and one girl even walked up to me and said, "I like your style." It was such a simple comment, but it cracked open something in me. Maybe I didn't have to fight alone here. Maybe I could build a new circle, piece by piece. But courage doesn't erase pain. There were nights when I cried into my pillow, certain I had made a mistake, certain that no one would ever see me as real beyond my family. There were mornings when I looked in the mirror and asked myself, is this really who I am, or is it just a dream I'm chasing because I don't know how to be anything else? Those questions haunted me more than any whisper in the hallway. It was during one of those low nights that my father called. His voice was steadier than I remembered, almost warm. "I was looking at your mother's photo today," he said. And I realized something. I've been so afraid of losing the child I thought I had that I almost lost the one I do. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not real. You are. You've always been. I couldn't answer through the tears, but I knew in that moment that he wasn't just standing for me at graduation. He was standing for me still, even miles away. That gave me the strength to take the next step. I joined a small group on campus, students who, like me, were searching for themselves in a world that didn't always welcome us. For the first time outside of my family, I found people who looked at me and didn't flinch, didn't whisper, didn't doubt. They just accepted. And with them, I began to laugh again, to breathe again, to imagine a future I had never dared to picture before. Yet even with that, I knew the world wouldn't suddenly soften. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainty, with battles I hadn't yet fought. But every time fear threatened to silence me, I remembered the dress lavender in the mirror, blue at graduation, and the voices of those who finally saw me. My stepmother's whisper, my stepsister's laughter, my father's trembling words, "This is my child." And I realized that becoming their real child was never about fabric or appearances. It was about finding the courage to live as myself, no matter how many times I had to start over, no matter how many eyes turned to watch. Because once you've been seen, truly seen, you can never go back to being invisible. Adulthood crept in quietly, not with a dramatic shift, but with small, steady changes. Rent notices pinned on the door. Alarm clocks ringing earlier than I wanted. Bills stacked in thin envelopes that carried more weight than they looked. I remember the first time I signed my own lease, my name written in ink, trembling slightly as if the paper itself questioned whether I was real enough to claim that space. I told myself it was just a contract, but deep inside, it felt like a declaration. This is who I am. This is my home. Jobs came and went, each one carrying its own tests. Some workplaces were quiet enough that no one asked questions, while others felt like walking through a minefield of stares and subtle comments. The hardest part wasn't the words, they were easy enough to dodge, it was the moments of silence, when colleagues would look past me, never quite knowing where to place me. Those silences could suffocate, making me doubt whether I could ever belong. But life has a way of weaving unexpected threads into the places you least expect. At one office, where I spent hours hunched over spreadsheets and fluorescent lights blurred the hours, there was a coworker who noticed the little things. She noticed the necklace I wore one day, the way I styled my hair the next. She didn't ask in a prying way, she simply smiled, as if it all made sense to her without explanation. One afternoon, when the day dragged too long and my doubts pressed too heavy, she leaned over and whispered, "Don't ever dim yourself to fit in. The world's already too grey." That sentence carried me through months of shadows. Still, the fear of rejection never vanished completely. I carried it everywhere, like an invisible second skin. Meeting new people, shaking new hands, I always wondered, will they see me as I am, or will they see only what they expect? It was exhausting, and there were nights I wanted to run back to the safety of my stepmother's living room, to the old walls where I first wore that dress. But I knew I couldn't. Growing meant moving forward, even when it hurt. The real turning point came the day my father visited me in the city. Years had passed since that trembling declaration at my graduation, but when he walked into my apartment, I caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, like he was still learning who I was becoming. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, and after a long silence, he said, "I used to think my job as your parent was to shape you. But I see now it was to stand beside you while you shaped yourself." His words landed like an anchor. For the first time, I believed that his acceptance wasn't fragile, it was real, steady, growing. And with that anchor, I began to build more freely. Friendships deepened. I let myself be seen in ways I had once feared. I joined spaces where my voice wasn't just tolerated but welcomed, where my story wasn't just endured but valued. And in those spaces, I found something I never thought I would, the courage to love and be loved. It didn't happen with fireworks or sweeping gestures. It happened slowly, in late-night conversations and shared meals, in laughter that eased the weight I carried. The first time I revealed the full truth of my past, I braced myself for distance, for rejection. Instead, I was met with a gentle, "That just makes you even more you." I realized then that love, the kind that lasts, doesn't erase the cracks, it embraces them. Even now, years later, I can still feel the texture of that first dress against my skin, the weight of it in my hands. It was never just fabric. It was a door, one that opened into a life I couldn't imagine back then. A life full of stumbles, yes, but also full of standing tall again. A life where the phrase real child no longer felt like something I had to earn, but something I had always been, waiting for the world and myself to see it. Life kept moving, as it always does, and soon I found myself in places I had once only dreamed of. New cities, bigger responsibilities, a circle of people who didn't just see me but relied on me. But with every step forward came the weight of memory, the girl staring in the mirror years ago, clutching a lavender dress that didn't belong to her, trembling because she wanted it to. There were moments in my career when that memory returned sharply, like when I was asked to speak at a community event. They wanted me to share my journey, as they put it, a word that sounded too polished for what my life had been. I almost said no. But standing on that stage, looking out at a crowd filled with strangers, I realized I wasn't trembling anymore. My voice shook at first, yes, but it carried. I told them about fear, about silence, about the years of hiding. I told them about the night my stepmother found me, about my father's words at graduation, about the weight of being seen. And when I finished, the room was quiet, not because they doubted me, but because they were listening. That silence was different. That silence was full. Afterwards, a teenager approached me, eyes wide, voice unsteady. I thought I was the only one, they whispered. In that instant, I understood something that had taken me years to grasp. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a thread that others could hold when they felt like slipping into the dark. The dress that once felt like a secret had become a symbol, not just for me, but for anyone who needed to know they weren't alone. And yet, life kept testing me. There were family gatherings where old relatives struggled with my name, clinging to a version of me that no longer existed. There were co-workers who smiled to my face but stumbled over pronouns behind my back. Each slip was a sting, but each time, I chose to stand a little taller. Because every time I did, I was standing not just for myself, but for that teenager in the audience, for the frightened child I used to be. One night, years later, I sat at the kitchen table again, this time in a home I could truly call my own. My father was older, his hands slower, but his eyes softer than ever. We were flipping through photo albums, and tucked between the yellowed pages, I found the graduation picture. There I was, in the blue dress, my face caught between terror and triumph. I stared at it for a long time, and then my father said quietly, "That's the day I stopped pretending and started seeing." He didn't need to say more. That single line held every apology, every acceptance, every ounce of love he had struggled to show. I realized then that the dress had never transformed me. It had revealed me. It had stripped away the mask I had been forced to wear and demanded the world look at who I really was. And once I had been seen, I couldn't go back. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel that first night, the cold air of my stepmother's room, the lavender fabric trembling in my hands, the fear that someone would find me. I can feel the way my heart raced when my father claimed me as his child in front of the world. I can feel the moment I understood that real isn't something given. It's something you claim, step by step, word by word, breath by breath. That's the truth of it. The day I wore her dress, I didn't just become their real child. I became my own. The final turning point came on a day I never thought I would live to see, my own wedding. Even as I write these words, my hands shake, because it felt less like a ceremony and more like the culmination of every battle I had fought to exist. For years, I had convinced myself I would always be too fractured to love and be loved fully. But life, once again, surprised me. The morning of the wedding, as I stood in front of the mirror, the same old questions whispered back to me. Am I enough? Will they see me as real? Will this day belong to me, or will it belong to the shadows of who I used to be? I thought of the lavender dress, of that trembling child hiding in a room that wasn't theirs, afraid of being discovered. And then I looked at myself again, not in borrowed fabric this time, but in a gown that was mine. My own choice. My own reflection. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. The ceremony was small, family, friends, a circle of people who had seen me stumble and rise again. My stepmother was there, tears in her eyes before I even walked down the aisle. My stepsister sat beside her, squeezing her hand. And my father stood at the front, not as the man who once hesitated, but as the man who would be giving me away, his voice steady, his pride visible. As I walked forward, the room seemed to dissolve. Every step echoed with the weight of my past, the whispers in the hallways, the laughter that cut deep, the nights spent staring at the ceiling asking why I couldn't just be normal. But each step also carried me toward something greater, toward someone who looked at me and saw not confusion, not doubt, but simply me. When the vows were spoken, I nearly broke. Not because I doubted, but because I finally believed. Believed that love could reach me, that acceptance could hold me, that I no longer had to earn the right to be real. The words were simple, but to me, they sounded like a lifetime of promises all condensed into one moment. I see you. I choose you. The reception was filled with laughter, music, warmth. But the moment that stayed etched in my heart came when my father stood to speak. He cleared his throat, voice catching just once, and then said, "The first time I called you my child in front of others, I was terrified. Not of you, but of myself, of what it meant to let go of who I thought you were. But today, I stand here with no fear. Because I know, without doubt, this is who you were always meant to be. And I am proud. Proud to be your father. Proud to witness this day." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. And in that moment, I realized the story had come full circle. I no longer needed to hide in someone else's dress. I no longer needed to borrow an identity to feel alive. I was no longer becoming, I simply was. Later that night, as the guests drifted home and the music softened, I sat alone for a moment, staring at the hem of my gown. I ran my hand along the fabric and thought of the first dress, lavender and trembling, how it had felt like stepping into a secret world. And then I smiled, because this time, there was no secret. This time, the world had stepped into me. That was the day I finally understood the truth. The day I wore her dress, I became their real child. But the day I wore my own, I became my real self. And nothing, no past, no silence, no fear could take that away again. Years have passed since that day, yet sometimes it still feels like I'm standing in front of that mirror, clutching a dress that doesn't belong to me, praying no one will open the door. But then I look around me now, the walls of a home that echoes with laughter, the quiet hum of a life I built, and I realize how far I've come. There's a photograph on the mantel, framed in simple wood. It's from the wedding, my father's arm around me, his smile softer than I'd ever seen. Beside it, another photo, me holding a child, my child, their tiny hands curled against my chest. When I first became a parent, fear returned like an old ghost. I wondered if I would know how to love them right, if I would pass down my scars instead of my strength. But the first time they looked up at me, eyes wide and trusting, the doubt dissolved. One night, when they were old enough to talk but still small enough to need lullabies, they asked me a question I'll never forget. "Mama, were you always you?" I froze, the weight of the question pressing down. And then I smiled, brushing their hair back gently. "I've always been me," I whispered. "It just took time for the world to see." They nodded, satisfied, as if it were the simplest truth. And in that moment, I knew I had broken the cycle of silence. My child would never have to wonder if they were real. My stepmother is older now, her hair grayer, her steps slower. But whenever she visits, she tells stories of that night long ago, the night she found me in her dress. She tells it not with pity or shame, but with pride, as if it were the beginning of something sacred. And maybe it was. My stepsister laughs whenever she hears it, nudging me with that same mischievous grin she wore when she dared me to keep going all those years ago. As for my father, he doesn't need to say much anymore. His presence is enough. His pride is quiet but steady, stitched into the way he holds my child, into the way he looks at me without hesitation. Sometimes, late at night, I take out that old lavender dress. It's faded now, delicate with age, the seams fragile. I hold it gently, not because I need it to remind me of who I am, but because it reminds me of where I began. That dress was never just fabric, it was the first key to the door I had been locked behind my whole life. And as I fold it carefully and set it back in its place, I feel a peace I never thought I'd know. Because I am no longer hiding. No longer waiting for permission. No longer afraid of being seen. The day I wore her dress, I became their real child. But the day I chose my own path, I became more than that. I became whole. And this is the life I was always meant to live.